Hi there, I'm Josh. I'm your residential horticulture agent here in Santa Rosa County, and today we're going to talk about Florida-friendly landscaping. We're going to talk a little bit about what FFL is, some of the principles behind it. There's a yard recognition program that not a lot of people are aware of, but it's important, and some of my master gardeners or myself can come and we can look at your yard and give you a little flag. It's a nice program, and it's a way to recognize when people are making an effort to have a Florida-friendly landscaping yard and making an effort to actually live the principles. And then we're going to talk about FFL with your HOAs. I know that's a big issue for some people, and so it's important to kind of quickly go over, I mean, quickly, but it's important to go over how those two entities interact with one another and maybe give you guys a better idea of what the ideas behind some of those statutes were. So first of all, Florida-friendly landscaping is just a way of promoting sustainable alternatives to what we would consider conventional landscaping. And so we just use the research-backed methodologies, the things that we know work, the, the irrigation principles we know work, the fertilization principles that we know work, things of that nature. And it's all just designed to use less water and be less impactful on the environment. It is important to note that we don't exclusively use native plants in FFL. I know that there are people that will have issues with that, and that's okay. You are allowed to have whatever you would like on your property. If you want exclusively native plants on your property, that's perfectly fine, and that does fall within the FFL principles. But having introduced species and turf grasses absolutely also falls into FFL principles. And so it's a matter of balancing those things and balancing those plants and making them look good in your yard and making them effective environmentally. So here are your actual 9 principles for Florida-friendly landscaping. I understand that 9 things might not be something you want to think about every single time that you put a plant out, but I really want you to think of it more as 2 concepts and a goal. So the first concept is right plant, right place. I know that seems silly, and I know that that seems self-evident, but a lot of people will put a plant in the wrong place, and then they spend a lot of time and effort and money trying to maintain that plant. And had they just thought this is probably not the best place for this to begin with, they could have saved themselves a lot of trouble. So the next concept is just how do we maintain that plant? How do we care for it? How do we make everything more as efficient as possible when it comes to that plant? And that's why we talk about watering appropriately, and we talk about fertilizing appropriately, and we talk about using mulches, and we talk about how you can attract wildlife. Wildlife for a couple of reasons. One, we just like looking at them, and two, they're actually going to help you manage your yard pests, which goes into the next one, which is managing your yard pests responsibly. And finally, recycling your yard waste. And of course, all of that has the goal of protecting waterways. We get a lot of eutrophication in water. We get a lot of excess nutrient in water. And a lot of that comes from our landscaping practices. And so it's important to minimize that as much as we can. Okay, so right plant, right place. First thing you need to do is you need to know your site. Yeah, knowing your USDA hardiness zone is absolutely crucial, particularly this year because they just changed. Everybody kind of got bumped up by half a zone. So up there in J, where you were in zone 8A, you're now in 8B. The vast majority of Santa Rosa County went from being 8B to 9A. And then down there in Gulf Breeze, where the map here gets a little bit more tan, or a little bit more peach maybe, you guys are in 9B now. And of course out there on the barrier island, you're also in 9B. I got this map by zooming in on the big nationwide map that is on the USDA's website. The QR code right here will take you to that website. All you have to do is scan over that with your camera phone, and a link should pop up. And you can go to that, and you can try to scan further down into your neighborhoods if you really want to be sure. Maybe you're on one of these lines, and you want to be really sure. Okay, you need to know the plant that you're trying to place out there. And so it's important to know the mature height and spread of the plant. Don't base it on what you're going to buy at the nursery, because what you're going to buy at the nursery is going to be an immature plant. Know the mature height and spread. You're going to want a diversity of plant life, and that's where, in the very first slide I talked about, you need a mix of things. You don't just necessarily need one thing. So turf grasses are important. They have a very a lot of functionality in the landscape, as do introduced species and as do native species. They've all got their place. It's just a matter of putting them in their place. Um, and so we have an app. UF has actually developed an app so that you can do all that. It's got all that information right on it. If you go to this QR code here on the left, you can access that app. It will take you to, oh geez, it'll tell you the color of the flowers, it'll tell you the height, it'll tell you whether they like sun or shade, whether they like a lot of water or a little bit of water. It's all in there, and it's a very useful tool. You need to understand ecological services. And what I mean by ecological services is anything that plant does that will, apologies for my phone, anything that plant does outside of just being in a landscape. So if it filters water, if it builds soil, if it provides for pollinators, those would be examples of ecological services. So go ahead and pick the ones that are in line with your philosophy for gardening, and understand that not every plant that you think is bad is necessarily bad. So it's a matter of understanding where all of these different plants fall into the landscape and how they can be useful. For instance, there is a lot of push about turf grasses and how they're bad and how they're bad for the environment and how they use a lot of chemicals. In reality, turf grasses are actually extremely good for the environment. You cannot beat them as a biofilter, and they're hard to beat as a soil builder as well. And they cool your environment, and they dampen the noise around your house. So there's a lot of benefit to having turf grasses that not a lot of people see. I see it because I read the research about it. And then it's my job to convey those kinds of things to you. So understand that there are things with ecological services that you may not recognize having ecological services that are actually wonderful for the environment. And turfgrass is one of the big ones for that because it's gotten a lot of bad rap lately. And finally, we want to avoid invasives. Now, invasives is another thing that has a lot of misinformation out there. There is an official list of things that are invasive. And by invasive, of course, we mean it gets into the environment and it crowds out other species and it has no competitors and it just takes over. And it doesn't provide services a lot of times, or if it does, it only provides services to one aspect, like one type of pollinator. It's not necessarily the right type of pollinator anyway. And so it's important to avoid them because you're going to create a lot of havoc. And so over here on the right side of the screen, I have 3 resources that will take you to plant lists that will tell you what is and is not an invasive or considered an invasive officially. Of course, we have the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants. That's out of UF, and they can help you. They have a plant list on there, which I believe is what this QR code takes you to. And you can type in the name of the plant, and it will pop up, tell you if it's invasive, Category 1, Category 2, things of that nature. Next is the Florida Invasive Species Council. Now, they are an advisory body to FDACS and to the Fish and Wildlife Commission, who create those lists of the things that are officially, those 2 other organizations are the regulatory and enforcement bodies for invasive species. And so these are the advisors for that, and they have a list on their website as well. I believe it's 2019, so it's a little bit dated, but it's still a pretty good list. And they'll be able to tell you whether or not your plants are invasive or not. And then finally, the Florida Natural Areas Inventory is just a good tool. They have, that's another one where you can type in plants, and if you can't find it on the other 2, you can probably find it there. And they will tell you whether or not it's invasive and tell you all about it. So those are all really good resources. Okay, so right plant, right place. The last thing we need to think about is the placement of these plants. Of course, you always want to group by water need. You don't want to be putting something that doesn't need a lot of water with something right next to something that does need a lot of water. So you wouldn't put a cactus next to a water lily, for instance, because the irrigation need for those are so broad that you'd wind up killing one of them. You also want to keep in mind windows, doors, and walkways. Of course, you don't want to put a giant tree right in front of your door because it's going to grow and it's going to crowd out your door. Same thing with walkways, and it's just important to think of things that way. And then Planting things appropriately, so make sure that you're not burying your trees too deep. Make sure that you're not burying your bushes too deep. Make sure that you're planting bedding plants the way they like to be planted and things of that nature. A good way to do that, as you can see on this diagram right here, is sort of give a rough sketch, and you're going to want to put some kind of scale on this, but make sure that you have a rough sketch of your property and then kind of where you want to put things, and then as you can see, the trees on this have circles on them indicating their mature size. It's just a good way to kind of go in there and put everything together and see how it all fits together and try to make it fit as best as you can for your environment. All right, principle number 2. Irrigation is the #1 killer of plants. That is pretty much universal, whether it's a turf grass or whether it's a tree or whether it's a potted plant inside your house. Overwatering will kill your plants. Your roots need air. They need oxygen. And if you're not giving them that air, you are going to kill them back. CHO, NPK are our macronutrients, and the only way to get CHO is through air and water. And so you need to make sure that your roots get air. The other problem with them is if you over irrigate, you can actually erode your soil. You can make it go on down the street, which is not what you want. You want your soil in your yard or in your landscape. You don't need it on the street. It's not going to do anything for you there. And if you over irrigate, you can also leach some nutrients, or if you're using slow release nutrients and you put them on the grass and then you over irrigate, you can actually kind of get those little molecules, not the molecules, those little clay balls to kind of go down the street. And that's not what you want. So irrigate appropriately. We don't want to over irrigate. And keep in mind that if you're using natives, this is one of the reasons for using natives in this environment is they're going to mirror their growth environment. And so if they are native to here, then they are used to the environment here, and they're more likely to grow with less work. That's kind of the idea behind natives. That's not to say that introduced species can't or don't have similar needs and won't thrive here as well. So it's just a matter of matching the need of that plant as closely as you can to wherever you put it in your landscape. Okay. The most important question in irrigation is how often and how much. I get a lot of people call me and I ask them about their irrigation and they always give me a time. It's not a time thing. I can't tell you how much water is coming out of your irrigation system. I can tell you that for things like turf grasses, it's appropriate to only water them 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch when you do water per watering event. The way that you're going to know that they need to be watered is your blades are going to fold in half. Because they fold in half, the light's going to hit that grass a little bit differently, and it's going to take on a color change. And then finally, as you walk through the grass, it's not going to have the turgor pressure to put itself back upright, so your footprints are going to linger there. And so those are the 3 signs that you need to water your turf grasses. As far as your trees and shrubs are concerned, once they're established, they shouldn't need to be watered at all. At that point, they have reached the water table, the roots have reached the water table, and they should be good. So unless we get extremely droughty, which does happen, they shouldn't need supplemental irrigation. And then as far as your bedding plants are concerned, you're going to want to water those in after you plant them and then daily until they're established. And much like the trees, once they're established, that means their root system is big enough that it's taking up enough water out of that soil. That does not mean that you're never going to have to water bedding plants. You will have to water them because you are going to want to keep that soil that they're planted in moist. You just don't want to keep it waterlogged. So ideally, your irrigation system would be set up for what's in your yard. I understand that this is probably not the case. Chances are you have only the sprayers on the right, like on the right here, and that's just kind of what you're dealing with. But ideally, if you can afford it, I would go back and I would take the irrigation system out. That's the big sprayers if in your bedded areas and in your around trees and things of that nature, which I know trees don't need a lot of water, but I would switch those to a micro irrigation system and then keep your big sprayers in your long grass areas. Realistically, you have what you have, and it's going to pretty much all be those sprayers, and it's expensive to change it out, and so you're probably not going to, and I understand that completely. So when you do water, you're going to want to keep that timing and that frequency in mind, and you're also going to want to keep root depth in mind. And so again, I know you don't water trees. This diagram on the right here is just to indicate to you that different plants have different root depths. And so you're going to need to water to reach that deepest root depth. You're also going to want to understand your soil a little bit. Compaction is the thing, even in sand. You can still compact sand. A little 5-pound dog running along your fence line can compact sand. You're going to want to know if you have compaction. A good way to do that is if you just take a screwdriver, a flat blade screwdriver, and just try to stick it in the ground by one finger. And if you can do that, you probably don't have compaction problems, and you can go ahead and plan out like normal. If you do have compaction issues, you are going to want to fix those with aeration. Is generally the way you would do that, or tillage, depending on what you're growing. And the last thing you're going to want to know is your soil texture when it comes to irrigation. And the reason you want to know that is because the soil that's a little bit sandier is going to lose that water quicker than the soil that has a little bit more of a clay in it. And so you want to know that because you're going to want to know how quickly that water is going to exit your soil. And so it's important to do that. And there's lots of methodologies to do that. I'll let you YouTube those on your own. But you're going to use this little soil triangle right here once you figure out the proportions, and that's going to tell you what your soil texture is. If you don't want to Google it, of course you can, or YouTube it. You can call me, and I will walk over how to do all that with you. Okay, so how do you know how much volume your irrigation system is putting out? Well, a good way to do it is this is called the catch can method. Right here. What you do is you put these Tupperware, straight-sided Tupperware out, or cat food cans, or tuna cans, or straight-sided Tupperware. It can be anything as long as it's straight-sided. Throughout the zone, run that zone for 15 minutes, and then take a ruler and measure how much is in each of those bowls. It's going to tell you two things. One, it's going to tell you whether or not you're getting complete coverage in that zone, and it's also going to tell you how much water is being put out in that zone. And then based on what is being watered in that zone, you can go ahead and adjust based on that 15 minutes. So you know if you put out 1/4 of an inch in 15 minutes, then you know you need to run it for 30, that kind of thing. Okay, and coverage is in fact key. You're going to want to make sure that your irrigation system covers your entire lawn. If lawn grass is all you have, then make sure it's covering your entire lawn, and make sure it's watering that 1/2 inch once a week or so. Always make sure that you do that in the morning before the sun rises. The reason for that being your plant's not going to uptake water unless there's sunlight, and it's going to take a while for that water to get through that plant. And so you water in the morning so that by the evening that grass is dried out, and you reduce your fungus issues that way, because it's not just water sitting on it all day long. Also, if you try to water in the middle of the day, you're losing probably half of that to evaporation before it ever even hits the lawn. And so it's just water before dawn, an hour or so before dawn. This is where the timed irrigation systems come in very handy. Just water like an hour before dawn. Once the sun comes up, the plant will start to use that water, and it reduces the amount of moisture just sitting on those plants. And lastly, it does not matter how much you irrigate driveways and streets and sidewalks, they're not going to grow. They're going to stay the same size, and all of that water is just going to run off. And now you're basically just paying out of your pocket for your irrigation system to refill the bay and refill the Gulf of Mexico. So make sure that your systems are aimed in the right directions, and make sure you're getting full coverage. To kind of explain what's going on in these pictures down here, the one on the far left, you can see that color change that I spoke to earlier in turf grasses, where if they don't have enough water, they take on a little bit of a color change. That's what's happening there. You're going to see a little bit of that blue-green. It's not going to be quite the same color as the rest of the grass. That place is just not getting enough water. On the far right, that's somebody that needs to realign or possibly replace that irrigation head because they're just watering the street and it's not doing anything for them except for costing them money. And then, of course, in the middle, this is one of my favorite pictures, is a perfectly rectangular dormant grass in the middle of the summer. So grass is not really supposed to be dormant in the middle of the summer. It can get too hot and go dormant, but for the most part, it's not going to be. It'll be green in the middle of the summer. A perfectly rectangular spot like this is actually a sidewalk that was in that spot, and the grass grew over the top of it. And so no amount of irrigation is going to solve that. You're just going to need to know that sometimes there's things in your grass and you have to go dig them out. And then finally, it's important to note that rain sensors are actually a law in Florida, and that we get about 68 inches of rain per year here in Santa Rosa County. And so that's important because rain counts as irrigation. And so if you are paying attention to how much rain we're getting per each event, that can offset your irrigation. And also these rain sensors will stop your irrigation system from running when it's, from running when it's raining. And so that'll just keep you from having irrigation issues and waterlogged soils. Okay, next is fertilization. Make sure that you're getting soil tests done. They're fairly cheap. If we send them off to UF, they're only about $10 plus shipping. We do have a new way of doing it where it's $30, but the shipping's included, and we send it to a different lab, and you get a little bit more user-friendly dashboard for that. I can help you here. If you come into the extension office, we can talk about all the different soil tests, and we will also do pH for you here for free. All you have to do is bring us a sample, and we will do it. So why is soil testing so important? Well, you can see, and these are the older tests, but they're just a little bit more graphically appealing, and these come from Okaloosa County. But why do you need a soil test? Well, you can see right here on these tests that the one on the right has way too much nutrient in that soil. And so if he were to irrigate, or she were to irrigate, just based on that, it is not going to work. You're going to be over fertilizing, you're going to have issues with toxicities, and you're going to have issues with leaching, and you're going to have all kinds of issues. And so you don't want to do that if you have the test on the right. If, on the other hand, you have the test here on the left, you do need to fertilize, but you don't know what elements are at what levels. And so sending those things off for a soil test will tell you all of that. It'll save you money on fertilizer. It'll save you money on your turf grasses dying off. It'll just save you money. It's just a good idea to do. You also want a desirable pH, and a soil test will tell you that. So why is pH so important? Well, you can see on the chart here on the top that different pHs make different nutrients available, up to and including some of those that you don't want to have happen. So for things like vegetable gardens, we always say you want to be somewhere between 5.8 and 6.2. Well, you can see that the majority of what you need for vegetable plant growth is available to the plants in that range. And so soil testing will tell you what your pH is. And if we shoot it off to the UF lab or that other test, the soil kit test, we'll come back with a buffering capacity, and we'll be able to tell you how to adjust it. And so it's important because the nutrients won't be available if you're outside of that range. It's also for some things like turf grasses that, believe it or not, don't like a lot of fertilizer, particularly centipede grass. It likes to be down in that 4.5 to 5.5 pH range, and you can see there's not a lot of nutrient available to it at that level. But that's where it likes to live. And so if your soil pH is down there and you're trying to grow zoysia grass, it's not going to work very well because zoysia likes to be up in that 6 range. And so that's why all those things are important to know. It will drive your fertilization, and it will drive your plant selection. Okay, fertilization is considerably less fertilizer than you probably think it is. All of these levels here for the turf grass are in 1,000 square feet per year. Keep in mind that when I say per year, I mean between 15 April and 15 September. You can see in the little picture I have on here, you're not going to really get a lot of root mass in your turf grasses till about 3 lines to the right there. That's going to translate to about April 15th is when we're finally getting the root mass that we have to where the plant can even accept that fertilizer. The only tissue on a plant that can take up fertilizer is roots. And so we tell you not to fertilize till April 15th specifically because we're waiting for that root mass to get big enough after it's been dormant for the winter and some of that root mass has died off. We're trying to let it grow back and letting it get enough root mass there to take up your nutrition that you're putting down. On the other side of that chart, you'll notice that it's starting to die off about September. We're starting to get cooler. We're starting to get cooler nights. The roots are starting to die off. Again, we're getting back to where there's just not enough root to take up that fertilizer. And so we ask you at that stage to stop fertilizing for the year. You may be a little bit shocked by these numbers for the turf grasses particularly. The centipede grass only wants 0.4 pounds of nitrogen. Everything's in terms of nitrogen per year. And sometimes it doesn't even want that. If you have a yard that's well established that has a lot of organic matter in it, you may not need to fertilize at all. It's just a matter of what's going on in your yard. And again, that speaks to why those soil tests are so important. As far as your other landscaping plans, there's just too many to list here. We can help you figure out how a fertilizing regimen for those, everything from citrus to bedding plants. We can help you figure out a fertilization strategy for that. You just have to call us and say, hey, I don't know what all fertilizer I need to put down, and we'll walk you through. We'll look it up and we'll walk you through that. Also, if you do the soil test, they'll come back with a recommendation. Okay, mulches. Mulches have a lot of good aspects to them. They control weeds, they help water stay in your lawn. Some of the things, assuming it's a natural mulch, will actually break down over time and essentially compost and add some nutrient to your yard. That's where they start to turn not as good, just because that can become excessive. And so if you have an excessive amount of mulch in your yard, you can actually create nutrient leaching problems that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So use mulch appropriately and use mulch to the levels that you need to, not excessively. It's overall, it's a good thing to have. It's just a matter of using it appropriately. And keep in mind that free is not always free. I know that in the north end of the county, EREC throws out mulch every year. Particularly, there's the site there in Chimukla where they throw it out, and that's all free to come get. And it's a good resource. But I would compost it away from your plants for a little while first, just because you don't know what kinds of funguses might be in that mulch. And so you're going to want to give it a minute, let it bring it up to temperature, get everything in it killed off, and then apply it to your gardens. Okay, as far as using mulch appropriately, please don't volcano your trees. That's what's going on here in the left picture. Basically, they have stacked so much mulch along the bottom of that tree that it's trapping moisture against the base of that tree and will probably wind up killing that tree. And so we don't want to do that. We want to mulch appropriately. That's what's going on in the picture here on the right, where you can see that they have mulched up to the base of the tree, but not excessively and not up the base of the tree. Okay, managing wildlife. We of course want to attract wildlife, and so we need to build habitat for whatever animals you're trying to attract. Now, if you're trying to attract birds, then you need to know what those birds like to live in, and you can build houses and things of that nature for that animal specifically. You can also use the reverse sort of principle here, and you can eliminate any habitat for things that you don't want in your yard. And so things like mosquitoes. If you have excessively damp leaf matter in your gutters, you can eliminate that, and you can eliminate the habitat for that pest, and you can get it out of your yard that way. You're going to want to use integrated pest management strategies for this, and this is part of it. This is biological controls. This is what is going on in this picture right here is a tomato hornworm that has been attacked by parasitoids. The parasitoids have laid their eggs on that hornworm, and those eggs will hatch, and they will eat that hornworm, and they will eliminate it from your garden. And that is one of our integrated pest management strategies, which I believe we talk about in a later slide. Make sure that you're recycling your yard waste. And what I mean by that is if you are mowing your lawn and you cannot see the grass blades, leave them there. Don't worry about getting them picked up. If it's excessive, like is what's going on in this picture here on the right, then you're going to want to go ahead and sweep that up and throw that into a compost pile. But if you're not having excessive amounts clumping like that, don't bother picking it up at all. Leave that mulch right there on the grass. It will help. Um, any disease plants of that, things like that, they need to be removed and they need to be taken to the trash. Don't put those in your compost because in the offhand chance that that disease makes it through the composting process, you would just be adding it back to your gardens. So make sure that stuff like that is getting thrown away. But things like when your annuals begin to senesce, because they will start to die off after 1 year. That's what annual means. When that starts to happen, that kind of thing can go into a compost pile. Um, any papers, wood products, things of that nature can go into compost piles. Um, Torn up, you want it to be like little 1 inch pieces, but you can do that, and that will help you um, just manage the yard waste that's going on, and then you can recycle it and you can use it back in your yard the next year. Okay, so the entire thing that we're looking for is protecting our waterways. And so stormwater is a major contributor to pollution. A lot of people don't think about it, but when you look at the nitrogen cycle, what you do is there is a lot of nitrogen that gets rained down. When we get our rains, there's a lot of nitrogen in that water. And so you're going to want ways to mitigate that. And turf grass is a great way to mitigate that. If you put that, create a swale that's got turf grass in it and let that water kind of pool there, that turf grass will absorb that nitrogen as it gets eliminated, and that reduces the amount that you need to water, you need to fertilize. Of course, we don't really have a way to, there's not an average amount that's in there, so that makes it a lot harder. But you could go on the lower end of your fertilization and just kind of count on that water to help you. We are trying to reduce the amount of impermeable surfaces that we have, and that's why a lot of times we'll talk about walkways through your gardens that are made of mulch instead of concrete, things of that nature. That is one of the goals. You want as little impermeable surfaces as possible because you want that rainwater to go through some sort of plant life, whether it's a rain garden or a lawn or something like that. You want it to go through that so that it can get filtered. So, and these are the goals that we're after. We don't want as much fertilizer and pesticide going through into the water directly, and so we funnel that through plants as best we can. We want to keep our ground covered as much as we can. We want to make sure that we're cleaning up the pollutants that may roll off of our yard. Pet waste is a big one there. Have a mitigation philosophy in place for that. They do make pet waste composters is a thing that you can look up, and you can do that. Using rain gardens and swales where they're appropriate is important. Rain garden is just and that's on the next slide. But a rain garden is just an area that you funnel storm water into that cleans that storm water and allows it to drain and recharge the surface water reservoirs. Swales are just sort of depressed areas in your yard where water can collect, and it's kind of the same idea as a rain garden. Water collects there and then slowly funnels back into the surface water reservoirs. Use rain barrels and catchments as best you can. If you're getting excessive rain on your property, you can go ahead and catch some of that, and then you can reapply that when we get into more droughty times. Here's some example of rain gardens. This picture on the left here is one that's being used, the downspouts from their gutters on their house is what's being used for the rain garden to feed it. Basically, they just funnel all that into that planted out area, which is, of course, they've dug that out. It wasn't just naturally like that. They dug it out and they backfilled it with some very porous material, and then they planted it out. And so all that rainwater goes through the plant life and gets filtered, and that water has a place to go that's not just down directly into the streams and the rivers. This other one here on the right is just next to on a parking lot, and they've just sort of angled that parking lot so that all that water goes into that area. It's essentially a rain garden. It's not flowering right at this moment, but it is essentially a rain garden in and of itself, or I guess you could call that a swale even, that's planted out with grasses. So what is the overall goal of all of this? We want to keep those excessive stormwater introductions out of our big bodies of water, out of our rivers, out of our streams. They do provide nitrogen and they do provide phosphorus, and we don't want that to become excessive, because in the presence of algae, we get blooms, and that's what's happening in this picture is a red tide bloom, and it is killing fish off and keeping people from being able to go fishing, and people aren't able to enjoy our waters. And so it's important for us to try to mitigate that as much as we can. So we always try to provide low maintenance areas around water. We don't want to be putting pesticides within 10 feet of water. We don't want to be putting fertilizers within 10 feet of water. This is an example in the picture here below, but you could use grass areas if you wanted to and just kind of let them go wild. You don't want to mow and you don't want to put the grass clippings into that water, but if you just kind of let them grow and stay, as long as you're okay with that, you could use grasses for that. Well, we do, of course, we want to reduce invasive species along our shoreline as well. So make sure that when you plant those areas that you're keeping an eye on them, that they're not getting the invasive species getting creeping in there, things of that nature. And of course, always make sure you're not planting invasive species. These are great around waterways. This one is probably not the best just because it has a mulch component and you are that close to the water with a mulch component, but it's still better than nothing. And so you're going to want to be careful of that, because you don't want that stuff to, you don't want soil erosion, and you don't want that soil to go into that water body, and you also don't want that mulch to go into that water body. So you just need to be careful of things like that. Use seawalls if you have to. If you can't control it with plant life, just go ahead and use seawalls. Okay, so the FFL recognition program, like I said, it's a checklist that myself and my master gardeners will come and we'll do with you. It's not like we're just going to come look and then give you a judgment. We're going to do it with you. And we're just looking for some basic stuff. There's no prohibited plants. And of course, by prohibited plants, we mean anything that's invasive. We're going to want to make sure that if you do have invasives, that they're minimized, or you have a mitigation plan in place for them, things of that nature. Make sure things are planted in the right spot. Make sure you didn't put a camellia right next to your front door that you now have to prune every year, because camellias don't like to be pruned every year. And just to make sure that you don't have any threats to the local waterways, things of that nature. There is actually a recognition manual. That's what this QR code is to. It will link you to that manual. And if you are curious as to what we look for, it will be in that manual. And of course, we don't use signs anymore. Now it's a flag, but the flag is going to be very similar to this one that's on the screen here on the right. Okay, now, as far as FFL and HOAs go, the Florida Statute 373.185 does say that deed restriction or covenant may not prohibit or be enforced so as to prohibit any property owner from implementing Florida-friendly landscaping on his or her property. That said, that does not mean that you can just do whatever you want on your property and avoid what your HOA says. Your HOA is going to have the ultimate say in your environment. Now, they have to follow FFL principles, but they can make decisions inside of those principles however they'd like to. So if they want to say that 30% of your yard has to be turf grass, they can do that. 30% of your yard at that point does have to be turf grass. It's the HOA rule, and turf grass falls into FFL, and as long as it's used appropriately and as long as it falls within those guidelines, they can do that. It's not, and if there's nothing that you're going to do, you're not going to be able to call me and I'm going to say, no, that's not in line with those FFL principles, and so they can't do it. Even if you do call me and something is not in line with those FFL principles, all I can do is explain to you how it's not, and then you need to take that to your HOA board and talk to them and say, hey, the FFL guy for the county says that this doesn't necessarily fall in line with that. I think we need to re-examine this provision. And so the HOA at that point can re-examine it, and they can decide whether or not they want to keep it. I don't have any legal authority. I'm just an educator. So I don't have any legal authority in this front. There are a couple of resources here, how to make your neighborhood and your community more Florida friendly. That's going to talk about how to set up your covenants and how to set up your HOA rules and things of that nature, so that you can avoid a lot of those problems. They have some language in there that will help you write those covenants and help you rewrite those rules so that you can be FFL friendly and still compliant with your HOA and have those two entities talk to one another. The other one is, that's the one here on the left, the 2009 FFL legislation Q&A, are probably all the same questions that you have, that people have already asked, that the state office has already answered. And so if you go and you peruse through there, you're more than welcome to call me if you have any questions about it. And you are more than welcome to come in here and pick my brain or my Master Gardener's brains about it. If we have something that we kind of come to an impasse on, I can always call the state office and have that, get some clarification for you. So you're not kind of out in the woods with this. You do have resources, and you do have things in the county that are here to help you. We want everybody to have the best experience that they can with their HOAs, and we know that a lot of times these two entities can seem like they're not quite in line with one another, but they actually are. And so we can help you navigate that, and we can help you understand it better. And maybe some things that you thought were not in compliance with FFL actually are. And so we can help you navigate all that. There it goes. So that's all that I have. These are the extension gardens here at Santa Rosa County at the Milton office. We are actually transitioning this area of our garden into much more of like a food foresty, foodscaping type concept. This is very early stages of that. We have some hibiscus planted out, and we have some vegetables over there on the left, and we've done some other stuff in there, so that's exciting. And of course, you are of course always welcome to come up here and talk to us about it. One resource outside of the ones that I already gave you in this course, if you just Google Florida Friendly Landscaping and then the letters IFAS, you'll get everything that University of Florida has on Florida Friendly Landscaping. That trick works for everything. So if you want to know more about tomatoes, you can just type tomatoes and then IFAS, and everything that we have will come up for that. My Master Gardeners and myself, we are available on Twitter, which I guess is X now. I probably need to change that symbol. And then Instagram, and then Facebook is our most active social media. If you look up UFIFAS Santa Rosa County Master Gardeners, we put little videos out. I share things from the state FFL office. I share things from the state Master Gardener program. There's a lot of good information on there. We're building it out so that if you need a program, that we can better facilitate that for you with either myself or Master Gardeners coming to teach you how different things work. So thanks for paying attention, and thanks for listening to this video. And I hope your yards and your gardens can thrive. And if they are not, please give us a call here at 850-623-3868. Thank you.